This is Chthonia, the world of the dark feminine. Hello and welcome to this month's Chthonia Conversations. I'm really pleased to have back on Chthonia Dr. Joanna Madloch, who, those of you who have been listening for a long time would remember that Joanna and I did a podcast on Baba Yaga. In fact, I think that was my first interactive podcast. Most of the time it's just me blathering on about some subject. But we had a really good, I thought that was a really excellent interactive session that we had talking about Baba Yaga. And Joanna, I've joined her back today because we're going to talk a little bit more generally about Slavic mythology. There are a couple of topics that I have addressed during the year. And I thought it would be useful to talk about some of the differences with Slavic, what we call, what's often called Slavic paganism or Slavic religion, vis-a-vis Christianization and things like that, and the way that it's sort of resisted that and retained some of what we see from archaic religion. Somehow still it seems to be retained in those practices. So welcome, Joanna.
Hello. I'm very happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy you are here. I always love talking with you. So I think where I want to start with this conversation is, as we were sort of talking a little bit about the preliminary, is talking a little bit about what we know about the origins of Slavic mythology. I mean, it's not, as we know, it seems to be, there's not a whole lot of sources. It seems to be fairly obscure. There's some relationship to Rome, at least in structure, to Roman religion. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, so it's very, very hard to talk about Slavic mythology. And I really like when you said Slavic paganism, because I would think that, the construct of Slavic stories, it's really, really hard to see it as mythology in a way people understand it when they think about Greco-Roman, when we have so many sources, when there's so much literature, when there are primary sources. In Slavic mythology, I'm going to use this word anyway, nothing like this exists. So we don't have written primary sources. These stories were not written down originally. So in this way, I would say that Slavic mythology, or the body of stories, is more similar to Norse, which was written down by Christians already. But Norse mythology was written down earlier, and there's a construct because of Snorri. And there are books, and these books draw from many, hopefully, original sources. With Slavic mythology, nothing like this exists. And things that we get from the past are either written down way, way, way after this existed as a system of beliefs. I would say like 19th century mostly. Or we get them, we reconstructed them from what functioned as active Slavic paganism, which not only has been alive for centuries, but during my travels to Poland recently, I discovered that it's really coming back. And people are turning towards what looked like funny folklore into more like serious way. I'm not saying this is going to replace Catholic Church in Poland by no means, but when it comes to custom, let's say like weddings, which were held exclusively in a church in Poland because like 95% population would identify as Catholic. Now you can actually encounter weddings, especially, and sometimes even funerals, which was recently like one of the celebrity actors, which are done in the old Slavic religion. It's very hard to say what the Slavic religion really is, as I said, because of the lack of sources. I would look more at this like a system of stories from which we can reconstruct with some dose of probability what this religion or mythology could look like. And when I say there is a great revival, I want to show you the two books that were published in 2001, and I just got them like free from press, which is Slavic mythology,
Okay.
which is a great attempt. The book, which not only has the stories, but it has a glossary and it has an extensive bibliography.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one, which is the beasts of Slavic stories.
That one looks amazing.
And yeah, it looks amazing. It is amazing. and there's a website associated with it. And what really, I think, illustrates the best what I just told you. This is Slavic mythology.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is the beasts.
Right. The one volume is the mythology one is much slimmer than the beast one. Yes.
It's much slimmer, and even when you go inside, when I look at the content,
mm-hmm.
which is in Polish,
right? So I will not be able to read it. But yes, okay.
There are 3 parts
mm-hmm.
to this, and it behaves like any kind of like good mythology book, with part 1 being about gods, and I was very surprised to find the theogony part here and cosmogony. I never knew these stories. Honestly, I never knew that Slavic stories contain the stories about the creation of the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So this is really the first time I saw it. They have obviously, they quote sources, but nothing like this was written down before. So we are so in depth of the authors of this book, which studied this. This is
Who are the authors of this book?
Jakub Bobrowski and Mateusz Wrona.
Okay.
And
we'll put the citations in the thing. So yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And so we have creation of the world, creation of humans, creation of the underworld, and this is this first part. The second part already are the beasts.
So the beasts are clearly the prevalent characters, shall we say, in these stories.
Yes, and then after the beasts, there is part 3, and this is heroic stories, right? That the heroic epos stories.
Okay.
So there are beasts, which are named here. This is a funny word that does not translate to English. And actually, the authors talk a lot about the words they use. So they are trying to use old words for Slavic stories. The words that exist in Slavic languages parallelly to the Latin counterparts.
Right.
So they don't say anything like nature.
Mm-hmm.
They say nature, but in the old way. They don't talk about these beasts, which many of them were acquired by Christianity, so they look like devils. But they don't talk about them as devils. They talk about them as biesy, which is this is a synonym, but this is a very meaningful synonym when you don't use the Western world word for the same kind of creature. The use of the seemingly archaic word changes the meaning here.
Okay, interesting. Is it when we talk about when you use this word? Is it? I don't know, but when I hear that, to me, it almost carries the connotation. And again, this is a really probably not a great word to use just because of how it's often used. But I think of like, say, fairies or those kinds of spirits. Are they somewhat akin to that, or is there a difference from that?
There is a difference, I would say, because they are and they are not, right? Like always in this story.
Yeah.
There is a comparison.
Yes and no. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. There is the comparison to fairies, but absolutely not fairies that, like your average American.
Oh, definitely not the American ones. I'm thinking of the really old school Irish ones is what I'm thinking of.
Old school Irish ones, yes. There's the very if I would have to use one word to bring up the notion of these creatures, I would say it's unpredictability.
Yep. Okay.
So it's that most of them are neither good or bad. They're acquired by Christianity with the notion of evil, but this notion of evil comes from the untamed, right? This is something that Christianity tried but never really conquered. So in a way, these creatures, they stayed. And many of them, when you mentioned the, I think that there are many comparisons and many similarities to Irish, especially. Because when you think about it, like, I just browsed through this book. There's so much to talk about here. There's a specific, let's say, spirit. The spirit doesn't cut it. Creature that lives in your. Many of them are associated with the house.
Okay.
And there's an entire group which is associated with fields, with agriculture, and there's the entire group associated with the woods. And in the woods, there's a group associated with different kind of elements like water, air, trees, very often like bogs. They embody the dangers of getting lost. What happens when you leave the known world of your own habitat? Because
so
it is
the
chaotic, yes. Yeah. But even the creatures that you cohabitate with, they're chaotic, they're unpredictable. You should try to live with them. You don't have a choice. You cannot domesticate them. They always do whatever they want. You can try your best to be nice.
Well, you basically have to try to live with them because, yeah, exactly. You're not going to control them.
No, you're not going to control them. So, like what people would do is like giving this, like dish with milk, leaving crumbs for them. So you hope. This is like an offering, obviously, right? But there is
it's very archaic, yes.
But there is no set deal, right? It's not like with the Greek gods. Like, let's say you offer them something, you kind of expect something. You can bargain. You cannot bargain here. This is like you are at the mercy of them. So you can try your best and hope that something like, many of them are female, that one of them is going to take care of your children instead of suffocating them in their sleep, right?
Right. Well, that almost gets back to the idea of when I think of, well, first of all, I think of, again, if I just go back to Rome in my mind, because I think of the Lares and the Penates and the kinds of spirits of the household. And, that's what it, just from that context, that's what it makes me think of. But also just even the pre-Olympian kind of, context where you're not only dealing with these spirits that sometimes are even confused with spirits of the dead. I mean, they're not necessarily the same, but they're often conflated with each other because there's this very Chtonic kind of element to them and to how they operate. And also when you're talking about them, I'm thinking of the way in which like the Furies or even the Manes of ancient Rome are referred to as the kindly ones,
Oh, yes.
It's like, yeah, right. Let's, you're the nice ones because, we just don't want to, piss you off enough that you're going to do something bad, Yeah.
Yeah. And definitely, I absolutely agree. Very often you can see how this is really like ancestral cult of ancestors, right? That these spirits, they have shapes of old men, old women. We have like obviously grandfathers and grandmothers there, and the graves would be just next door, right? And in Slavic custom, which reflects, I think, in Catholic custom now, there is such a great attachment to the ancestry, to the ancestral spirits. I don't think that anywhere in the world graveyards, cemeteries are so cherished as in Poland, and people like regularly visit. My parents would visit their parents at the cemetery at least once a week. And if they don't go, this is like the big problem. And they would even say something like, oh, grandma is going to be angry.
Mm-hmm. It's funny.
And
My
you
mother's that
know,
way too, and she's
mhm.
Slovak Polish. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there's this feeling that you have to do this and you have to bring the flowers. And when it comes, you know, like the All Saints Day, you have to literally take a loan to make this grave the most beautiful place in the world. And people would go and sit and talk and meet family at the grave. There's no eating there. But definitely, when I lived in Poland, there was like the entire family met and just talked there.
Wow.
Even if it's November, I mean, in Poland, November is usually not the very welcoming month for outdoorsy activities. At the
You
same
right, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How interesting. Okay, that's
Yes. Speaking of which, I wanted to show you this. The female and the male. There is the entire part in this book about females like that.
Oh wow. I'm gonna have to get some of these images for this. Yeah, that is so cool.
Yeah, and they're called Baba, which means old woman.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not a nice word that you wouldn't call them anybody like this, but there are different kind of babas here. And
Mm-hmm.
you know that there is a cake named Baba or Babka too in the Slavic
I did not know that. No.
cuisine.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but some of them are like berry Baba, pea Baba. My favorite, the cemetery Baba.
Oh my God, I love this. I love these images. I love them.
Yeah, this is very, very pretty. This is the, you know, something troll-like,
Mm-hmm.
but this is female.
Yep.
This
and
is
yeah,
the,
she's carrying the skulls on the sticks there.
there is a Baba from the woods, the Baba from the from water. And when I read part of this, there's a very interesting passage in one of these books. Why so many of these spirits, whatever they are, take forms of old women and very ugly old women? And I think this is partially what we are talking about when we talked about Baba Yaga, which is a witch.
Yes.
Being old in this society, being an old woman was something very unnatural. Women died quite often in childbirth.
Right.
We very often think that the men died young because of, you know, hunting, combat, whatever. Things happened to young men. But honestly, unlike now, when women have longer lifespan, men lived longer. So being an old woman, it meant by definition that you are doing something strange, because how
very Puritan, right? You're
yes.
too good at this. There's something too right about you, or it's too perfect. You must be practicing witchcraft. Yeah.
Yes. So obviously you've made some sort of a pact with the darkness, right? Which is showing on your face, because not only you're old, but you're also extremely ugly. And you can see like what on these faces, there's like nature on these faces. Things are growing out of it, like they belong to earth already.
They become wild, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, and this is why the society removes them, and this is why they linger somewhere at the bog, somewhere in the woods, something like that. Yep.
That's phenomenal. I love that. That's phenomenal. It's yeah, because it just really exemplifies the whole that whole aspect of nature, and that whole aspect of nature as feminine, as darkly feminine. You know what I mean? It's you know, because some of these pictures, and yeah, I am going to try to get some of these for the actual, like, both the video and also just to put in the description there. It's they're great. They're actually like somewhere between Stephen Gamble and Brian Froud. You know what I mean? You know, it's like,
oh yes,
it's the best. It's like they're the best. I love it.
Yeah.
They're really cool, especially that one in the churchyard, in the graveyard, like thing. I thought that was really cool.
Yes, because when you have a male ones, they are very often, I wouldn't say they are always like friendly, because they are not, but they could be funny, right? Like this one.
Yeah, it looks actually almost kind of silly,
This
actually.
is,
Yeah.
yeah, it is silly because this is a spirit of beer.
And of course, I'm sitting here drinking beer while telling you.
That's what happens. Like this is the patron in a way of drinking. So if one drinks too much, there's possibility that on the way home from the tavern, they are going to encounter something like this. Be aware.
Yeah, warning you about the beer belly that you might acquire in the process, right? So, yeah.
But the nose, I'm all about the nose.
The nose. Oh, yeah, exactly. That's funny. That reminds me actually of the old Slovak grandfather nose. That's what it looks like to me.
See?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It really does. Like what I've seen. That's wow. That's pretty interesting. Do you think at all, because one of the things I was noticing when I was kind of reading up on this a little bit before we got into this, we have these kinds of beasts, these figures. Do you think there is a difference between like people will talk about Eastern Slav versus Western Slav versus what's in Russia versus what's in the southern part, the Balkan countries and so forth? Are there any that you know of, any particular differences that might stick out there, or is this kind of like a universal kind of thing that goes through that whole region?
This is a great question, because we don't have sources.
Right. Okay.
We just have customs. Many people, like, especially because I'm talking from the Polish perspective, many people would think about even a country like Poland. From the American perspective, this is not a particularly big country. From the European perspective, this is a significant size country. And especially with history of particular regions belonging or mixing with different cultures, nothing is pure here. Right. Nothing is clear. You could live in one village in Central Europe without ever moving and live in 3 different countries, and people would migrate and move. So, for example, this little girl.
Oh yes, she's rather spooky looking with the glowing eyes. Yes.
Yes. Her name is Południca, which means like the spirit of the midday, of the noon spirit.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And I didn't know about her. How I found out about her was like quite recent Czech movie, which features her as a metaphor. She's a metaphor of a heat stroke.
Makes sense.
Because obviously people were going to work in the fields, and very often they got sick. I never heard about her in Poland. I didn't live in the agricultural society, though. I lived in a big city, so maybe I missed it.
Right.
But this was like, for me, she's more like the southern, because of the weather, right? If you move south, the summer is going to be less forgiving.
Yes. Well, it's funny because I think of like the Egyptian Sekhmet, who is like very similarly is like the noonday sun, and also the Eye of Balor in Irish myth. When it opens up, it burns everything in front of it. It's the idea of the sun as being destructive in a way.
Yes,
and the sun is female. The sun's female actually in Slavic myth, as the moon is masculine. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
That's what I thought.
And also death is female.
So, of course she is. Yeah. But it's interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Very often it would turn out we tell the same stories. Different Slavs would tell same stories. And especially when it comes to the overlapping mythology, like stories about creation, I would say that we would share them. However, it really, really shows how local these stories are. These stories, or this kind of creatures, they don't have, they don't spread over thousands of miles. I think that many of these creatures was as a local communities, but it would turn out that other communities would have something similar, and you don't have to be Slavic for this.
Right. No, exactly.
Yeah, because like when you think about the big mythology, the stories of creation or the main gods, there is more similarity actually to the Norse mythology, because the main god is Thor-like. His name means thunder. So
Perun.
Perun.
Perun. Okay.
So yeah, so this means thunder or lightning, right? So there is there are no clear divisions, and obviously, when you move east or south, there are going to be differences. And in the current political situation with Russia's war on Ukraine, and using the argument that we are the same people because we tell the same stories, you can use it for an entire world. We all tell the same stories, right?
Like we were just saying before. I mean, there's evidence of this not only in ancient Rome but ancient Greece. I mean, if you go back pre-Olympian, most of these cultures were now we call it animism, right? We call it about the idea that everything is alive. And I know when I teach Roman myth, it's sort of like, okay, there's the water spirits, there's the forest spirits, there's the agricultural spirits, there's the spirits of the city, there's the spirits of the household, there's the spirits of the village, and this is something that this is almost I hesitate to even call it religious, and I don't like to call it spiritual either, because I think a spiritual, this is more to do with nature and soul, and just this initial lack of separation, I guess, between us and nature, and how we interacted with that.
Yes, and the desperate need, even not to conquer, at least to feel the illusion of safety. Because if you think about how this life was not only hard, but how dangerous it was.
Yes.
This is why we filled this world with the funny creatures, right? Or dangerous creatures. And our hope that we can do something about it, because even if there are the ugliest creatures imaginable, as in these illustrations, which are fantastic, there is still this thing like, okay, if I bring them that crumbs from my cake, maybe they're going to be okay with me for this week. Right?
Just better keep doing it. That's all. You stop. They're happy when you're doing it. You stop, and then they're like, "Hey, where's my cake?" Yeah. It's interesting, because in that sense, yeah, it is very much like that. But I think you raise a good point too, because I think a lot of people think that because we have this sort of sanitized 19th and 20, later versions of these kinds of creatures, or even Christianized versions, where you tend to think, we tend to think of them in good and evil terms, or you tend to think of them as I don't know. They tend to get watered down in some fashion, like some of the really like Dionysus, Bacchus can, in certain contexts, and these deities that are just very, very raw and very powerful. But it does kind of recognize the fact that there is that uncertainty, there is that danger. And I don't know, I've always felt religion has to do with the way we manage uncertainty. You know what I mean? It's the way in which and now, of course, monotheism is this established, traditional, ethical, moral, and this is all kind of beyond morals. It's like in some other kind of a space.
Yes, it's definitely beyond morals. Like, it's not about being good and evil in this world. It's like being good in the right moment. Being good doesn't help you in this world.
No, it doesn't. You're exactly. There's
And being smart definitely doesn't help you. It's like doing something at the precise moment, especially like in fairy tales, right? It's like you help somebody, somebody's going to help you back.
Yeah.
You never know.
Well,
And I
no,
also thought, sorry.
no, go ahead, please, go ahead.
And I also thought about, like the images, like how very often how ugly and dangerous these things are in the stories. How much of this is really Christianity? Because we get this through Christian lens, and Christianity wanted to see us, uh, wanted us to see this as evil.
Yep.
Because the stories are like, like when you look at something like that, right? It's like we have a lot of mixes. So these things, when Christianity takes over, they don't go anywhere. They kind of adjust.
Yes, you're right. They adapted. Well, I remember there was a what year did they say that it was? Now, this was something that happened in Kiev, I think, but there was a Prince Vladimir, I don't know if it was Vladimir the Great, like around 980, there was this attempt to kind of unionize, what the so-called Slavic religion, right? And to not only to incorporate it, because there was talk about how even the Orthodox Church at that time even practiced a lot of this paganism, like this is still part of it. Yeah, it's still, and probably still does. But there was this attempt to kind of, but they said that the Christianization had happened around 11th, 12th century was like when this was attempted. But it didn't, in reality, anything like Christianization didn't really happen until at least maybe 16th, 17th century or later.
Yes.
Because people resisted that. They was just like, yeah, okay, Christianity, whatever. Yeah. And they still continue to do the same thing.
Yes, and obviously there's a resistance. There's a resistance against the religion which is perceived as something brought from the West, and very often is associated, especially in Poland, which is like the border land with the Germanic culture, as recognized as something German.
Okay.
So it would be rejected as a part of the attempt of the cultural domination. And obviously, then Polish kings accepting Christianity as their own attempt to unify what is falling apart.
It's funny how Christianity is always used that way, because initially that's how Christianity even became the religion of empire. Because what was it? Constantine suddenly went, "Oh, hey, you know what? We could use this. It's this then they have the Council of Nicaea and everything, and it's just this idea that this religion that's so disparate and kind of spread out and syncretized with all these other movements that are going on, and the divisiveness. We could use this because it has a very good authoritarian kind of a pull. It's got one of the things I've always said that Judaism and the Romans had in common was this tendency towards rules.
Oh yes,
yes,
definitely.
And
yes, and also the fact that like the Western Slavs accepted Christianity from Rome, and Eastern Slavs accepted Christianity from Byzantium, which is reflecting the alphabets. People speaking practically the same language would write it down differently. Obviously, changed the stories, and the stories behaved in this new environment even further. And especially when the Russian Empire grew east, we have all the Siberian stories incorporated, stories of people, not Slavs, right, but who are falling under the dominant Slavic rule, and they are going to get incorporated too. And especially when we communicate more and more and more, and especially in 19th century, when there is the active search for the story to write them down, they become like inseparable.
Yeah, and after a while, right? So there's a syncretism that's even going on within that, as you have, and that's usually what it is, right? It's conquest. It's these different groups that take over and that conquer a certain area and try to unify, trying to create order out of chaos, and it's something that's. But it's so interesting how those elements still just hang on even in modern times. I was going to ask you too about what. Because obviously, like I said, you grew up with a lot of these customs. Do you want to talk about some of that, like some of the things that you grew up with that you would identify perhaps as specifically quote unquote Slavic paganism, for example?
Oh, this is one of the things that you talked recently about like getting rid of winter.
Yes.
In the form of drowning the doll of winter. not only drowning it, but burning it, like destroying, like building it first, which was lots of fun. And, we are talking about 1970s, 80s, weird place, which was communist Poland, where Christianity was very much alive. Unlike in other communist countries where Christianity was eradicated, which is another big topic. But in Poland, Christianity stood strong, and Catholic Church kind of lined itself up with the resistance against the Soviet
Solidarity,
Union.
yeah.
Yes, and the big part was the Catholic Church, which organized underground. But the way the Catholic Church now is fighting against Western pagan customs, such as Halloween, the Catholic Church never fought against the Slavic things, which were there. And people didn't think about them as part of Slavic religion. People thought about them as, something fun to do, like building this doll and drowning it. As I said, I lived in a big city. I was not that much aware how much of the solstice was a big festival, especially the summer solstice. If you live in the cold climate, summer festivals become very important, which was also associated with a prominent Slavic legend. I don't know if I talked about it before with you, about finding the flower of a fern, finding fern flower.
No, you haven't talked about that.
Yeah. So this is bordering. This is when mythical story borders on a fairy tale. So again, nature. On the shortest night of the year, young men would go to the woods to find themselves a fern flower, which, as you may know, ferns don't flower, right? That the flowers are under the leaves, if you remember your biology, but there's no big flower. So supposedly on the shortest night, ferns, or one particular fern, flowers, and you have to find it. And when you go to the woods are going to protect it. So there are going to be all the possible mythological creatures, all the bands.
Yeah, everybody in that book, yes. Yep.
Yeah, everybody in this book is trying to discourage you. There's going to be lots of dangers. But if you go there, again, with a pure heart, and you are very lucky, you can find this flower. When you find it, you have to pluck it. It's going to be very, very hard. And you have to put it on your heart. And when you do this, it's immediately going to grow roots into your heart. It's not a very pleasant concept. Right?
And then what would happen once it put roots in your heart? Like it would just be there, or like what's the idea?
You are going to be fantastically lucky.
Oh, okay.
But there is a catch.
Of course.
You cannot share this luck with anybody.
Ah, okay.
So look at this. You have to go there good. If you are not good, you are not going to succeed. One of these creatures is going to get you. And most likely like eat you, right? Like eat you up. You're going to be a prey to this. But getting this, which is like the immortality story, but also, like the golden egg story, something like this. This is going to turn you into something extremely selfish.
If
you share this gift with somebody, it's going to destroy you.
Interesting.
It's a very, very weird story. I found it fascinating. And
there's no morality to it either. I love it.
No,
yeah.
There's absolutely no moral stories. Like, go there, maybe you're lucky, but you're going to be very unhappy after that.
Well, I've seen, gosh, I can't think of the story now, but there are certain like Victorian horror or ghost stories that I have read that have gone along a similar vein where somebody discovers something. It's like, and oftentimes it's like in some ancestral, like, like somebody makes a weird maze with a tomb or something, and there's this stone in there, and if they take the stone, like they will need to possess the stone, but if they possess the stone, their lives are going to fall apart. They're going to become very unhappy, and yeah. And in the meantime, they're fighting all of these horrible things that are attacking them. So yeah, there's kind of a similarity there. Maybe it's even inspired by that. Who knows? It's interesting.
There
So
are many holidays associated with divination, with telling the future. And they're also acquired by Christianity. Because I would say like the most famous, the most important one is St. Andrew's Night.
Okay.
Which is also the old holiday now acquired by the Christian St. Andrew. And this is actually fun. And this is something everybody would do. And this is the party holiday. You party on that night. And yes, and you have to melt wax.
Okay.
Like melt beeswax.
Okay.
And this would be like the typical kind of holiday for unmarried people. So you would need like the big key, a lot of candles. You melt wax through the key opening into cold water. And whatever forms there, you have to hold it like against the light, and this is going to show your future.
Okay, that's interesting. Because people do that now with kind of candle divination, like how what forms the wax takes, and then you have to interpret, and how big the flame is, and all that stuff. And yeah,
yeah. So this has to be done on the specific night, the eve of St. Andrew's Night.
And when is that? When is that? Just for reference.
Oh, I think because I don't want to give you a wrong information. It's somewhere in December.
Okay.
Just a second. I don't want to give you the wrong date. I think it's a 6 or 7 or.
Okay, so it's kind of around like close to what would be St. Nicholas Day at one point, or
yes, it's a magical time. Like no, it's actually the 30th of November. I remember.
Okay.
Yeah.
November 30th. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, because it's not something we've celebrated here. So I was like, there's so many days for so many saints. Well, they each have their own day, right? Yeah. But that's really that's interesting. So anyway, so that's okay. So we've got these kind of divination things, seeing the future. You've got the other one you were telling me about, and then you had actually told me a funny story about the when you were trying to teach your daughter about the drowning ritual. I'm saying the name wrong. I was saying Marzana in the podcast, but you said no, that's not how you say it.
It's called Marzanna.
Marzanna. Okay,
it's fine.
So yeah. It's but it's so you had done something like that with your daughter. Can you tell us about that? Because that cracks me up every time.
Yeah, it's like I tried to introduce some funny customs, not for her to practice, but for her to know. And we lived in suburban New Jersey at this time in a kind of, like posh community. And there was a little stream there. And we made a doll. We made a doll out of like ping pong ball and clothes and everything. And we went there. I did not dare to set the doll on fire. This could get us in trouble.
People go, what are you doing? Yeah.
Yeah, but we definitely drowned it, and people were watching us as if we were crazy. Because yeah. My daughter got in trouble many times because of funny things brought from the Slavic territory. In this book, among other things, there is the goddess, maybe not, maybe this is other book. I'm not going to look for them, but there's one of the goddesses, like goddess of the sea. Her name is Jurata. And one of the very interesting places in Poland, the North Poland, is named after her. It's like vacation spot. And I don't know if I told you this story before, but this vacation spot is on a peninsula, which is called Hell.
Okay.
And it's Hel with one L. And this is obviously the Norse goddess,
Right. It's a
right?
reference
Because
to the
it's
Norse goddess. Yeah.
because it's the peninsula that goes into the Baltic Sea. And obviously the Vikings and the Slavs mixed it there. There are so many signs of the Viking presence there. And when we moved to the United States, I didn't tell you this.
No, you did not.
When we moved to the United States, my daughter went to the first grade, and after the first summer, we went back to Poland and we went to vacation on the Baltic Sea, which is a very nice place to go if you like cold sea. And it's your average first day of class, September, and second grade, and children in school are usually asked, "Where did you spend your summer, little Tommy?" So little Tommy said, "I went to visit my grandmother in Florida," right? And little Kate says, "I went to, Disney World." And the teachers asked my daughter, "Where did you go, Alicia?" And my daughter, who is in second grade, but she exactly knows what she's doing at this point, she says, "I went to hell and back."
I was waiting for it. That's great.
How did I learn about this little incident? I learned about it by the means of the phone when, the school calls you and the principal says, "Everything is fine, your daughter is fine, but we had a bit of the situation here." She's in my office and supposedly she used some words, some vocabulary not fit for the second grader. And I was like, "Oh my goodness, what could she say?"
Yeah.
And the principal is like, "She said she went to hell." I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry to bring it to you, but she did. And we did it together and it was lots of fun."
I'm sorry you don't know geography and you're confusing it. And it still kills me that hell is a swear word at this point, but
Yeah, no, I didn't know. I wouldn't know that hell could be a bad word. This is a regular word. This is vocabulary, right?
It's just American idiocy is what it is. But yeah.
Yes, but this was the same teacher who called me once and told me that my daughter is reading inappropriate books because if you read a book which has more than 5 words that you don't understand on your on one page, this means this is not a book for you.
Oh, right. I think we talked about this teacher. Yes. Yeah. They're it's interesting, isn't it? How these can, but that's interesting too, because it's something that, it's said about here we are in the United States. And it's supposed to be like, okay, when I grew up here in the 70s, it was just in the 80s, it's like this whole idea that we are, there's a wide variety of cultures and there's a wide variety of personal practices and local and cultural things. But it's absolutely hilarious that when you get into that kind of a situation, the way in which, I'm going to call it the Christianization of it, the way in which people, absolutely want to see things in this. If it doesn't match that term, then somehow there's something not right about it, or there's something wrong about it, and especially in the education system. It's K through 12.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, because she got in trouble once for writing. She wanted to remember something and she wrote 7 on her hands, the way, you write 7 in Europe. And the teacher accused her of writing an F word.
Okay. That's very strange. It's wow. It's just interesting because that's not something that I would think. There's other customs and so forth that people have, so for example, people who practice, say, Santeria, if they sacrifice chickens and so forth, like they run into trouble because people don't, you can't kill, animals for this and so forth, like, just as an example. But with stuff like that, I'm like, that's just so, like, I don't know if that would fly today, actually, because, so many people are so, there's so much about protecting people's identity and protecting people's culture and not appropriating and not this and not that. There's so much of that I wonder that if a teacher did that today, if a teacher wouldn't get in trouble for doing that today. You know what I mean?
Yes, true.
you know.
Another thing that I taught her and did not stick was making wreaths. I would say this is like the very like, stereotypical idea of, like Slavic, custom, making big flower wreaths for your hair, for your head.
Oh, yes. Okay.
So we did it a lot with like wildflowers, right? And I think it's lots of fun and I can do this.
Yeah, and they're very beautiful. I mean, I've seen pictures from the different well, certainly from Ukraine more recently when they've shown the women who are wearing those.
Oh yes. Yes. Because I would say this young women would still wear them. Obviously those that get on the internet, they're like fancy one, right? But every young girl in a Slavic, countries would know how to make like a daisy chain and daisy wreath.
And that is that connected to anything in particular with the folklore, or is that just something that's done?
So once again, this is something that you would wear for the summer solstice.
Okay.
And not only you would wear it, but you would send it to the river. At the end of the celebration, you would send it to the river. And this is like the offering to the river. And eventually, now we know that there's rivers that are going to the sea. I don't know if people realized this before, right? But the idea was that which reef is going the fastest, this maiden is going to marry first, or something like that.
Okay. Gotcha. So it was another almost divinatory type of thing.
Yes. But again, you can see this like the San Lucia, I think, in Sweden with the reefs and light, right? This is like the offering.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. I remember that. That's something I actually remember from school. Back when, I guess, had to have been 79, 1980. I don't know, long time ago. So I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you, because it was about one of the things you had mentioned when you were talking about the book, and I hadn't thought about this before, but you were talking about a kind of, like a theogony that existed for, now, I don't know if you had a chance to look at that. Is there something, I'm curious about that sort of their idea of creation and their idea, of course, creation of the underworld is my big thing, but, just kind of any kind of like quick summary you can have of what that story is.
I didn't read the entire thing, but and why I didn't read the entire thing is because I got stuck on the creation of the gods, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
Okay.
In this story, the god of the sky and thunder, Perun, is sitting on a boat in the middle of the vast waters. And he's looking at the world, and we don't know how long he's doing this, but he gets lonely and kind of bored. And he looks to the water, and in the water he sees himself, but he reaches for this reflection in the water and he pulls it out from the water. And whom he pulls from the water is this other god. His name is Veles.
Yes.
So they're like two groups of gods, like immediately, again, like in Norse mythology, who is like Perun, but he's not Perun.
Veles is associated with the underworld.
Yes, and he becomes like the immediate friend antagonist.
And that's interesting, yes.
Yes, so this also like Gilgamesh, that's what I found here. It's like they are friends, but they have to fight. So the typical creation story from one many, but also when it splits, it's the immediate tension, right? But I love this idea of reflection so madly.
Well, it's interesting because it shows that they're really, in a sense, the same, but they're like different poles of the same, like they're two sides of the same coin. And it also just this idea, like, okay, when we live in a Christian culture that talks a lot about sin and atonement and or the biblical cosmogony, theogony, whatever, where there's this idea of Adam and Eve, that split as becoming like something that's sinful. But what I love about that story is the idea that it's like, you wouldn't, how bored he is without that. You know what I mean? Like there isn't any life, there isn't anything of any interest unless there's this tension.
Yes, yes, he creates like trouble for himself.
Yeah. And it's and I love that, because that creates a narrative that says, yeah, there's fighting, and there's conflict, and there's this and that, and that's how it works.
Yes, but also how it reflects the human lives with all
mm-hmm.
these little creatures, because human life without them would be blah. This
Well, that's
way,
it.
yeah, they have something to do there, right? Feed this, like appease that, fight that one. This constant entertainment.
Exactly. Well, and honestly, I think of what was it? The oh God, I just had the thought, and it's like my brain is not working the way it was. But there was a what was the story it reminded me of when you said that? It was the give me a moment. I think I'll think of it. This kind of oh, okay, now I know what I was thinking of. I remember when like the Jehovah's Witnesses used to leave like their watchtowers and stuff at the front door, and they had like, oh, this book. I think no, it was a book I found in a break room at work like years ago, like many years ago, and it was like, you can live forever in paradise on earth, and they're showing this like whole thing, and I'm like, who the heck would want to do that? Like that just sounds like the worst possible thing you could do. I mean, it'll be interesting maybe for it'll be nice and relaxing for like a week, and then it's like, all right, let's stir some crap up here. I mean,
Yes, definitely. And even like in the like very, very folk version of Christianity, when all these creatures kind of migrate and become devils, they're like specific devils of this folk Christianity, which they have their own names, like specific names, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And they're obviously belonging to the darkness.
Yeah, right.
But you can outsmart them. It's not like they represent the like the evil of Dante's Inferno.
Right.
They're still like deep from the woods. Like you can still kind of have fun with them. Not only you can have fun with them, you can take advantage of them. When
and
you
they
are
can
like
of you
smart,
too, probably too.
yes, but like when you are doing this, you are stepping on a very thin line. But there is plenty of stories about a peasant who outsmarts this or that devil, right? These devils are obviously versions of that. They're not, Satan, Lucifer.
Well, even Satan or Lucifer is not like, I have this conversation a lot, because when I talk to people who talk about the demonic, and I'm like, well, the demonic is no different than the angelic. It's just they just live in different places. Like one is more immediate and one is more transcendent, I suppose.
Yes.
And at least in theory, but I don't think that they're all intermediaries. They all come from the daemonic, as we know from Greek studies. Yeah, and although these spirits are seem more specifically spirits of nature, but when you have a religion that says that nature is corrupt, as Christianity does, like nature was corrupted by the first sin or whatever, because having somehow we were all supposed to live in the field of eternity and never really go anywhere, then it becomes then anything connected with nature becomes suspect and becomes evil, or something to be fixed, or something to be exorcised. And I think I bought into that kind of idea when I was younger, and I've kind of thrown that idea away since I've gotten older, and dealt with more things. But yeah, that's but those spirits, they're tricky, they're uncertain. You have to be careful. They're liminal. They're right. They're on that boundary space.
Yes.
And I mean, just having been in Ireland, I mean, obviously we're talking about Slavic beasts, but just having been in Ireland and having some kind of firsthand experience of that kind of energy that's there, I'm just like, oh, that's a real thing, and you do have to be careful of it.
Yes, like if you go hiking somewhere in Poland, very often on crossroads, you will see like a cross, or a chapel, or a little sign. The crossroads, right? This comes from pagan tradition.
Absolutely.
Of this is not a safe place. You better watch yourself. But at the same time, you have like friendly saint to watch over you there, just to, boost your confidence.
That's right. Well, in the ancient times, it would be Hecate, right? You leave this Hecate supper there, and there's there's this idea of later on it becomes the friendly saint, the good guy, right? But but yeah, it's just so interesting to see, the way that the split there, between, I mean, there was less of a split, I would say, in the more archaic versions of it. So I think it's interesting. I think what I'd like to finish up with is, because we were talking a little bit about the fact that this seems to be becoming like you said, it's not going to replace Catholicism in Poland, but it seems to be a more modern movement. Can you just talk a little bit about what you've seen of that?
So what I've seen is, as I said, people getting married.
Okay.
And the marriage is being officiated by, like pagan priests. Obviously, it's not legal, right? This is not a legally binding,
like the hand fasting ceremony type thing. Yeah.
Yes, because they still would have to go like to town hall.
Right. You still have to go to the civil marriage.
But the fact that this is not done by the Catholic Church is something very new, because even people who would not be like Catholic religious, they would still have like important stepstones like in their lives, somehow officiated and accompanied by the Catholic official.
Okay.
Also, the number of festivals associated with Old Slavic is incredible. There are these living museums, which, before it was just houses and maybe places like blacksmith place, and now there are living things, and something like Renaissance fairies, but in a Slavic costumes.
No, I've seen that in Ulster too for Ireland, but yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is becoming incredibly popular, and people are like really preparing for this. There is the island of Volyn in the northwest, where they have like the entire village, like Slavic Viking village, which is the living museum with people volunteering there like the year long, with the huge festival during the summer, when people actually, they are trying like to revive many customs, including, let's say, cuisine, right? Because the Slavic cuisine is very interesting, but it was like so many things were destroyed, first by Christianity and then by communism, the unifying forces, right? And poverty and need, and the immediate need, and the fact that people didn't have time for that. Not even that they didn't have time, they were afraid. There are so many things that they were stopping this. But at the same time, there is obvious need. This comes from the Russian friend. I attended a lecture about Siberia, and she was talking about like the grandmother's notion in Siberia, and Christianity there was completely destroyed by Soviet Union. It became illegal and dangerous and impossible to practice, and churches were destroyed and turned into barns. And I asked her, what's happening there now? And she's like, oh, it's all pagan.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The Christianity never came back.
Wow, that's interesting.
But there is a need, right? There's human need for some sort of spiritual connection, and it's all pagan. It's like a really great, incredible revival for Slavic stuff, which is also dangerous, I would say, because with the Slavic notion comes the incredibly destructive idea of Pan-Slavism, right? That's what we talk about, and which Russian regime is using now for conquest, right? We are all Slavs, we should get together, right? If we get together, we are going to be more powerful than Germanic countries. There are so many of us, we should get together. But the problem is that always when you talk about Pan-Slavism, it's under the Russian.
Of course.
Yeah,
right.
Under Russian. Yeah.
Well, what's interesting, just like for example, you see this in Nordic countries, and you're also seeing it like in Iceland and places like that. We are also seeing these pagan revivals that are, in not maybe in Siberia, maybe it's supplanted Christianity. In some places, it's as at least as prevalent as. And I wonder though if that isn't because, when you go back to a kind of paganism, it's not so much about this split. Like I feel like the ancient religions like that are more tailored to deal with uncertainty and with life as it actually is, rather than as we think it should be, according to some patriarchal system.
Yes, and this is another big thing that we don't have time, obviously, to talk about, because
Right.
when I said uncertainty, everything in this life and the reflection in stories is about uncertainty, but at the same time, Slavic languages don't have a word for trickster.
Wow.
Why all these characters are tricksters?
Well, they are, and it's interesting because it's such a normal thing that it's not something that's even differentiated. Yeah. Because
it doesn't need a name, because this is how it is.
Exactly, right. Your trickster is just for somebody who expects some level of order, or or divine law or something. That's so fascinating. Well, thanks so much, Joanna. This has been really, really interesting. I think this is a really good exploration of a lot of these themes. And you can stay on with me for a second, but I'm gonna stop recording. But just want to say thank you again, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Chthonia Conversations. If you would like to become a supporter of the work that I do at Chthonia, please visit patreon.com/Chthonia and consider becoming a patron. The different levels and the different benefits of each level are described there. If you are interested at all in personal one-on-one coaching, tarot readings, or other kinds of sessions, please visit my website, liminalreiki.com. The name has changed to Transition Life Coaching, but still retains the original Liminal Reiki logo and URL. So you may check that out if that interests you. All of my work is available with publishing, podcasts, and also teaching. Scholars of the Borderland, which is where I provide classes on myth, religion, and other subjects. You can visit that and find all information about that at chthonia.net. If you don't follow me on social media, I'm Chthonia Podcast. 2 words on Facebook, 1 word on Twitter and Instagram, and just Chthonia on YouTube. Please like, subscribe, check in, give a comment if you like, and hopefully I will see you again in the next episode.